Good evening. My name is Megan Lapointe, and I am the Senior Associate Director of Alumni Relations. It is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's webinar, Pandemic Fatigue, Helping Youth and Families. As you know, we are committed to keeping our alumni and friends engaged with St. Anselm. By partnering with our centers, institutes, other departments on campus, and our alumni, we will continue to offer webinars, podcasts, and other opportunities to stay connected. I am so impressed with the variety of programs offered this past year, and it is thanks to many people who have offered their expertise or suggested a topic. I would encourage you to contact the Alumni Relations Office if you have suggestions for future programs. Tonight's webinar is being recorded and will be posted to the college's website for those who couldn't make it live. Our panel will speak for about 25 minutes or so, and then we'll take questions. There's a Q&A button on your screen. Please feel free to submit questions throughout the discussion. We have two moderators this evening, Professor Maria McKenna of the Psychology Department here at St. Anselm, and Adam Belingas, who had graduated in 2001, is a counseling psychologist, a mental health counselor, and a psychology professor at Assumption University. Now I'll turn it over to Adam and Maria to tell you a little bit more about themselves. Adam, would you like to start?
Sure. Hi, everybody. As Megan just stated, my name is Adam Belingas, and I'm also a graduate from St. A's way back in 2001. I had to think about that, even though Megan just said that. I am a counseling psychologist and a licensed mental health counselor. And I've also recently opened up my own private practice. And I'll be brief about myself, just make a few comments as we transition over. In terms of my background, I have worked, and I guess I can say currently now work again with children, adolescents, young adults, in various settings from inpatient psychiatric hospitals to community outpatient settings, and a variety of mental health issues, but especially related to today's discussion, trauma, depression, and anxiety. And just as important, as it was stated, I'm a professor in the psychology department at Assumption University. Again, I will not bore you too much with my research background, but in terms of just brief highlights, I've done some research in mental health of high school students, including suicide prevention, school violence prevention, and college students, in particular smartphone addiction, adversity related to trauma, and just general mental health. And so another piece that I want to plug just a little bit here, because I largely teach in our clinical counseling psychology program, where I'm the cognitive behavioral therapies concentration coordinator, where we specialize in CBT. Our program trains graduate students to be licensed mental health counselors. And recently I've been in contact with two of our former students who are also panelists today, Zachary Agate and Jacqueline Charbonneau. And by the way, just a little shout out to them. They've been helping me set up my own private practice this year as well. They both have very thriving private practices serving children, adolescents, young adults, and of course, over the past year using telehealth. Just my brief comment before I turn it over to Maria here is there's no doubt that the pandemic has definitely taken a toll on all of us in many, many ways. And it's funny, I think now it's kind of like for a lot of us are over a year now since we officially kind of went into lockdown. Of course, many adults are struggling with this pandemic, and in focus here, especially parents. Youth too have also been especially hard for them, especially for the younger ones. It's hard to even understand what's going on, what's the situation is. And many are missing out on their daily school routine, including sports, clubs, and social events. I got a little 4-year-old. Understanding what's going on is very complicated, but I've been lucky that he's still been able to go to preschool and get some of those social aspects. The whole aspect of socialization and feeling connected is extremely important. So, you know, in the end, the pandemic has taken a lot away from us. And of course, a lot of us too, youth and adults, have also experienced the loss of loved ones during this time as well. So there's definitely some signs of quality of life improving. I think today in Massachusetts, we're in phase 4. So that's kind of good. I admit I get a little excited, although we're always told to be vigilant, which is important. But especially for us, today's topic, monitoring our own mental health and also our loved ones. But hopefully today our discussion could at least provide some guidance and hope moving forward. So I'll stop here and I'll let Maria kind of introduce herself and what we'll be talking about too.
Thank you, Adam. So good evening. It's a pleasure to be with everyone. It's especially nice for me to be here on this panel with 3 of my former students. So I've been at St. Anselm and the psychology department for 31 years. This is my last year. I'll be retiring in May. It's been a great 31 years. I primarily have taught developmental psychology courses, child development for elementary education. I've also taught psychology of the family. And this year I'm teaching a course for the first time, a special topics course in early childhood, birth to 5. And it's been an interesting time to be thinking about the development of young children during this time of the pandemic and the disruptions in our society and in all aspects of their world. So it really is, it's so nice to be sharing this panel with Adam, whom I had, I believe, in child psychology, and with Megan and Kate that you'll meet in just a couple of minutes, that were also students of mine during their time at St. Anselm. So we look forward to our discussion with you and with them. I think they have a great deal to add. Recently, I've also added, as I segue out of my teaching career at St. Anselm, I've started doing work in parenting education at a parent support center here in the town that I live in. And it's been interesting to hear from parents about the stressors and the concerns that they have already, which have certainly been complicated by the pandemic. So I, a little bit later, will share some of that perspective from my work with parents as well. Okay, so Adam, do you want to get us started with our panelists?
Yes, I will do that now. So I got a question for, of course, Zach and Jacqueline. And if you guys want, you can briefly introduce yourselves as well. I call this a simple but important question. And Jacqueline, if you want, you can go first on this. Is especially over the past year, doing telehealth, what are some of the more common problems that you've been seeing with your presenting populations when you're doing therapy?
Thanks, Adam. So just to introduce myself, my name is Jacqueline Charbonneau. I am an owner of private practice. I'm an alum of Assumption University. Adam was actually my professor there. Learned a great deal there. So in regards to what the presenting concerns that I've been seeing, a lot of what I've been seeing is correlated, what I believe with COVID-19. A lot of OCD, illness, anxiety disorder, a lot of generalized anxiety disorder, specific phobias, depression, adjustment disorders. And what's interesting is that a lot of the clients that I work with, which I typically work with younger children and older teens in particular, is that a lot of what they have for presenting concerns are being exacerbated by COVID-19. So they may have already had an anxiety disorder prior, but with COVID-19 coming into play and affecting the world and affecting the people around them, these disorders are becoming exacerbated, and we're seeing a lot of more focus on COVID-19 concerns in conjunction with some already previously existing conditions. So it's very interesting, as a mental health counselor, to help navigate through some of the interventions with some of the new COVID-19 concerns that are arising.
And Jacqueline, just briefly, before we go to Zach, what's the age range or population that you generally have been working with?
My most common age range right now is between 9 years old up to, about 21 years old. So I'm working with a variety, more middle school age, later grade school age, and high school.
All right. Thanks, Jacqueline. And Zach, same question for you. You can introduce a little bit in the populations and what you're seeing right now.
Sure. Thanks, Adam. My name is Zach. I'm a therapist in Northborough. I was also a student of Adam's at Assumption University, graduated in 2016. Before there, I was working in group homes for a while with my bachelor's in psychology. I worked with a lot of teenagers, young adults. I actually did my internship at a group home for adolescents with pervasive mental illness. And then once I graduated, I worked in a substance use facility for people who had co-occurring mental health problems and substance use problems. They're all kind of around the same age range that I work with now. So my practice, I see teenagers, 14, 15 years old and up. So I get a lot of those older teens, young adults, and then a fair share of adults as well. And very much like Jacqueline, I've seen a lot of increase in pre-existing conditions essentially during the pandemic. Folks who are depressed have gotten more depressed. Folks who are anxious have become more anxious. This really interesting thing that I've been noticing, a lot of folks who have not had it before started to develop social anxiety. Teenagers are just out of practice. They aren't going to school in person. They aren't going to sports. If they had a job, a lot of them have withdrawn from those. They just forget how to be a person that's not in their rectangles, or when there's not a lot of other rectangles also competing for attention. And it's just a reality. The thought of going back out into the world is kind of making a lot of people nervous, and they forget how to just be normal. So some of the stuff that we're talking about is just normalizing that, yeah, we're all in this together. A lot of us are out of practice. A lot of us forget how to order in a restaurant. We haven't done it for a while. So just kind of like reminding them we're all in this together. And, a lot of these issues that we're having, we're all dealing with them too. Another thing that I've noticed is probably not surprising, but an increase in substance use. Anybody who's already engaging in mild substance use here or there, vaping, marijuana use, we've just seen an increase in simply they've got more time on their hands. They're home, they're in their rooms, they're on Zoom, they can turn their cameras off and they can kind of do whatever. And it's like a lawless land. And when people are kind of left to their own devices, it shouldn't be surprising that, not feeling so good, they find themselves engaging in a lot of addictive behaviors. And I'm not just talking, marijuana and, nicotine, vaping. They'll certainly get a bad rap, but Netflix is another one. People, if you need to binge 8 hours of Netflix to get through your day, it's hard to say that that's less problematic than, using some substances, for example. So a lot of these things, I've just noticed are avoidance. People are feeling feelings. They don't like the feelings that they're feeling, and they're looking for anything to distract them so they don't have to feel and process their emotions. And the consequence of that, certainly short-term relief, but in the long term, they never quite figure out what it is that they actually need. What need is not getting met that they're trying to self-medicate for. And that's largely what I've been noticing in my work.
Thanks, Jacqueline, Zach. All right, Maria, go for it.
Okay, so we're going to turn to Kate Denby, who is a school counselor, and she can tell you a little bit more about her job. And then also, Kate, what's interesting is that you see kids on ground in the school. That's not happening for a lot of kids, but it is happening for you. So you've really been able to, I think, probably get a sense of how your kids are reacting, sort of compared to a typical year in school. What are some of the things you're seeing that may be related to what they're all living through right now with the rest of us?
Good evening. I just want to say thank you for inviting me to be here. I'm so honored. Professor McKenna, you're one of my professors at St. Anselm College. I enjoy continuing our relationship. And again, I'm working with Meredith, who was one of our interns in my school. It's just a pleasure to be here, so thank you. As Maria said, I work as a middle school counselor. I have been doing so for 18 years. Prior to that, I worked for Easter Seals of New Hampshire, Cratchit Mountain, and then I also did research at Mass General as well as Boston Children's Hospital. In conjunction with St. Anselm, I continue to foster the mentors and doing research projects as well as internships, which is always a lot of fun. In my role as a middle school counselor, now more than ever, empowering young people to be resilient and take an active role in their mental health is a key component in helping them be successful, not only in the classroom, but outside of the classroom with their friendships and their families. To answer your question, it's certainly been a roller coaster. We've been out of school, we've been in school, we've been out of school, and then we've been back in school over the past year. Some of our students have been fully remote for the past year. Some of our students have chosen a hybrid. Some students have been full in person since the end of August. All of those, it's exhausting. It's exhausting for our young people, for our teachers, for our families. And I think as Adam, or I believe Zach had mentioned, there's a part of it that just normalizing that I'm with you, I'm here with you, we're all in this together, we're going to get through it, is so comforting for some of our families. specifically to answer your question, I think the students have been very resilient. I think developmentally, right now I work with a group of 7th graders, just over 300 7th graders. And if we can just imagine what it was like to be a 7th grader ourselves when springtime came, we know how developmentally we just want to make friends and talk and have fun. And in person, sure, there are social opportunities, but COVID and restrictions have certainly put a damper on just some of the nuances of how great it is to be a teenager. These children are resilient and they're positive, and in my opinion, they're heroes. They're following the rules, albeit maybe we need a few gentle reminders, but they're trying their best. And I think certainly to echo what Jacqueline and Zach and Adam have said, anxiety and depression, all of those things are certainly highlighted. Social anxiety, a lot of questions of students who have been remote for a whole school year. What happens in September when they come back? How are they going to adjust to school again? So lots of questions. Certainly I'm happy to sit and answer and be here with you in this and normalize some of it, because it's a scary journey, but we're all doing it together. And I think that's ultimately the message I'd like to put out there.
Thank you, Kate. Also with us tonight is Meredith Whitney, also a graduate at St. Anselm College, and now a doctoral candidate at William James University, and a licensed school psychologist, and working on her dissertation now. And Meredith, you can tell us a little bit more about that. And then also you might address a similar question to the one I asked Kate, but the students you work with are different. They are already severely challenged in emotional and behavioral areas. And so it'd be curious to know how the pandemic and how the changes in their lives have affected them as well, and what you see in your work.
Sure. Thank you so much, Professor McKenna. Super excited to be here also. So yeah, I'm Meredith Whitney. I'm currently a licensed school psychologist working towards becoming a licensed psychologist in my doctoral program. I have about 1 year left, heading out for an internship soon. I'm also currently working as a school adjustment counselor at a collaborative in Walpole, Massachusetts. So the collaborative is specifically designed for students who have been placed outside of the traditional public school setting due to significant emotional and behavioral challenges. Many of the students that I work with have experienced significant complex trauma, subsequently been diagnosed with PTSD. I see a lot of anxiety, depression, emerging, personality disorders, mood disorders. So we see pretty complex profiles of students. I've also completed internships across the spectrum of care. So I've worked in traditional public school settings. I've worked in, substantially separate school settings, and also have worked in an inpatient setting for some time. So currently the students at my school are fully in person. They just went back fully in person. We've had that option since September, but some of our students were doing a hybrid model. So some of the days in person, some of the days remote, and then some were just doing fully remote. But now we are back to fully in person, which has been a little bit of a struggle. We actually just had to shut down for a week due to some positive cases. So that's certainly something that have seen definitely disrupt, the life for our students. I think one of the biggest challenges we have been facing is the lack of academic engagement that I think is subsequent to, the pandemic. And also, I think it was Zach who was saying before, also seeing, a lack of social engagement. So students wanting to stay home and just stay on their video games all day, after going through a period of such time of, being kept away from their friends and forced to be away from friends. We've been seeing a big struggle in getting kids back engaged socially. Unfortunately, too, we're seeing an increase in suicidality, which is something that's been a struggle for our school. So, in order to address that, really working on that homeschool connection and trying to stay connected with the families and with the outside providers to really, create those wraparound supports for our kids. But I too have seen a huge increase in social anxiety, which has been tough. So I think that's what I have for now, but any other questions I'd love to answer.
Thank you, Meredith. Adam, do you want to start our next round of questions?
Yes. Yep. So I'll start off with first Zach with this question here. We talked a little bit about individual differences, but I just want to see what you've experienced in terms of what are some of the common issues you're seeing working with families, and then maybe not the double barrel the question, but related to that, what's it like doing teletherapy? It's one thing to do family therapy or working with families, but now you're doing this working with families through telehealth. What's that like as well?
Interesting that you bring that up. I would say the main issue at the moment working with just teenagers and young adults right now is finding a place to meet where their families are not. I mean, kids share rooms, their parents share an adjoining wall with their bedroom. And then sometimes I'll get, halfway through a therapy session, they'll say, I don't want to talk about that because I think my mom can overhear everything that I'm saying. And what that honestly brings right to the surface is the issue of confidentiality. The way therapy works, the way that we know that people are going to go to therapy and dump out their purse and talk about all the stuff that you don't usually talk about is you have confidentiality. You know that it's not going to leave here. But if mom knocks on the door and says, hey, I heard that you told Zach that you've been vaping again. I thought I found your vape. Well, then all of a sudden we don't have confidentiality and we lose a lot of good therapy. So on my end, I've had to problem solve just everybody's on top of each other. And some ways that I found creatively around that has just been like having people meet for therapy in the garage, just, on their phone, sitting in the car because, well, that's a closed space. It's quiet. Nobody's going to interrupt you. And if they do come in the garage, they're not going to hear what you're saying in the car. Or trying to creatively schedule a therapy session when we know everybody else is out of the home. Mom and dad are running groceries or, your siblings out with their friends. Okay, cool. 2:00 in the afternoon, that's a good time to meet. Now, outside of like scheduling telehealth and, the actual medium itself, issues with families I've noticed has just been, they don't know how to be helpful. Your kid's home for 8 hours. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to check in on them every 5-10 minutes just because they are home. I mean, absence makes the heart grow fonder, right? So if your kid's usually gone and he's at school for 7-8 hours a day after school activities, they probably use a little bit of space in their room to be on a Zoom meeting, not be competing for attention between their teacher and mom and dad coming in to ask them what they want for lunch and things like that too. Kind of like almost like trying to keep those boundaries as much as possible to give us some space to be our own people as much as that's logistically feasible when everybody's in the same home. Now, again, things have opened up quite a bit more since a year ago. Wow, a year ago. Since a year ago when this first started, and everybody was on top of each other. But now some people have returned to work, and some people are left home. They're still doing remote schooling, remote working, and you're still kind of navigating those waters of being on each other's toes, but not knowing should we be going out now, and should we be home still? So now a new kind of phenomenon that's come up is this over? Mom, everybody else is going out. Can I go out and see my friends now? Everybody else is hanging out with their friends. I should be allowed to too. And kind of navigating people's different values and priorities with respect to this pandemic. So I'd say families definitely tie in and are woven into a lot of the adolescent issues that I'm seeing. And some of it's just no elbow room. People just need some space from each other, which hasn't been possible.
Thanks, Zach. Great response. I like the theme there, getting space away from family, especially with adolescents, right? Don't even think of those things they take for granted, like the walls being thin or all that kind of. I've heard plenty of our current graduate students, the same stuff you said, like having their clients go into a car or walk outside onto a porch or a deck just to get away and to have that privacy at the same time. Before, just as a friendly reminder to the audience, feel free if you want now to, if you're got any questions for us, you can put it into the Q&A, something to think about as we move forward here. So Jacqueline, same question for you, working with families. I know you work with the younger ones, a little bit younger than Zach, so maybe this might be more applicable in a different way. And again, if you know, in those cases, navigating teletherapy, if families actually are involved at the same time working with the kiddos.
Yeah, so when it comes to the younger children, I've found that some parents are hesitant to try out teletherapy because it is so new, especially with younger kids. Typically, when it's in an in-person session, there's a lot of interactive like gameplay going on to build rapport. Whereas when you're on a teletherapy screen with a younger child, that's where the therapist has to get creative in engaging the client. And sometimes, initially in the beginning, we have to explain to the parent that there might be a little bit of a limitation in the beginning of that, the speediness of building the rapport because of that lack of hands-on engagement with playing games together, and typically what we do in the traditional, in-person setting. But encouraging families to give it a try. The therapists that are providing telehealth services are able to navigate around some of these concerns, where we really have become creative in providing some sort of way to access screen sharing or playing games interactively on an online setting to be able to accommodate for that. So I think one major thing with families for younger children is this concern that there is limited access to resources for help. But this really isn't the case, because if the therapist is comfortable in providing, telehealth services, we would be able to help navigate that. And if we feel that in-person services are more suitable, depending upon what the child is dealing with, we would be able to refer out. I know some agencies right now are taking in-person services on a limited basis. I've seen with families as a whole, a lot of conflict in terms of how each family member is coping, which tends to affect the younger children that I've seen. One particular instance that often comes to mind for me when explaining this is that younger children feel like that a lot of older adults aren't understanding the extent of the anxiety that they're going through. A lot of parents are providing the resources that they can, providing child with therapists and access to guidance counselors, primary care providers, psychiatrists if medication management is needed. But I think one really important thing to implement within the home is to have open communication and allowing the child to discuss their concerns if they're comfortable with the parents, and allowing them to know that they are being heard in terms of how scary this coronavirus can be. I think, ultimately, if we can understand that everybody has a different way of coping and supporting one another and allowing each other that open communication, that might even help the child be more open to seeking therapy. Some children are hesitant with it, but I think if we can collaborate and be openly communicative in terms of how we're feeling, that might help promote some of the misinterpretation that might be going on when children feel like that they can't really express fully how they're feeling.
Great, thank you, Jacqueline. Very insightful. I really appreciate those thoughts, and it is kind of nice. I'm glad to have both you and Zach. They're just kind of balance how things. There's similarities, but there's definitely differences too. Working with the kiddos versus mid to late adolescence. So, thanks for sharing those thoughts. I see a couple questions going in, but Maria, you want to go ahead and take the next turn at it?
Sure. I thought that was has an interesting parallel, Kate, in terms of school. I think you were mentioning the challenges when we were talking earlier that families have in trying to support their children's learning. So they're trying to support them emotionally at home, and now families have also been thrust in many cases into the position of educator in the home, trying to keep their children working and on their assignments and doing their work. So your partnership with parents obviously has changed a little bit this year. And I wonder if you could just talk about that a little bit and about the stressors on parents and families.
Sure, thank you. Such an important question. I think COVID has us feeling a bit isolated. And so much so as parents, we are working hard for our paychecks. However, we also have children in other rooms that need our assistance as well. From both perspectives, as a parent and as an educator, it's just so important to stay in communication with the teachers. They're our first line. They're the ones that have the answers. And sometimes children can get very creative with what the answers might be that you're asking them, because perhaps you might not know the full situation. So you might get a lot of homework is done, I turned it in, I hit send, I don't know why it showed up blank. All of these, we can answer that for you. Just reach out to your team, rely on the village that is your school or mental health professionals, whomever is your support system with your children. It's just so important, because you might not have the answer, and your job is to do your work, to make the money, and to try to balance things out. You know, also, I joke because I felt like sometimes when I was home with my children, I was like, okay, I'm now working in the cafeteria. It's lunchtime, but then I have to get back. And so it's like you were balancing and wearing so many hats, but how do we do so with grace? And honestly, we have to lean in a little bit to the people that are our village. I do that personally and professionally. I encourage the parents that I work with to do so as well. Let's reach out. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, let me reach out with you as your school counselor. I've worked with this team of teachers for years. I know how this operates. Let's do it together. And sometimes just knowing that there's someone there that can kind of hold you, even as adults. Okay, I'm going to hold your hand. We're gonna answer this question. And then sometimes the answer is my child not telling me the truth? Yeah, sometimes you have to do the work and then hit send, and then the teacher gets it. So it's kind of learning the system, and then we step back and say, okay, now I understand Google Classroom. Now I understand the meets. There's a huge learning curve for all of us. But I think there's power in saying, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know how to do this, and then to reach out. So much more so than saying, I know everything, we're all knowing, because really, really there isn't much that we all know right now. Every day is a new challenge and a new adventure. So I say reach out to your team, talk to the teachers, talk to the school. They're happy to help.
Great, thank you. Meredith, I might put the same question to you. And what do you see as particular challenges right now for families?
Sure. So I think Zach kind of hit on this earlier. I think one of the biggest things I was seeing and still seeing when I have students on remote learning are the invasions of privacy during our counseling sessions, whether it be parents coming in or siblings walking into sessions, walking behind the screen. I think something that families have really been struggling with is having 3 to 4 kids at home, all on remote learning, and how trying to find how to navigate that. It's been a struggle for us. I find that we have been doing a lot more family work as a school this year than we have in previous years, and working with families and trying to, find better ways to kind of navigate those tricky situations at home. I think something else that I'm really seeing too is I work with a lot of students who have had some pretty traumatic backgrounds and come from there's some instability in the home. And so a lot of what we're seeing is, if students are home on remote learning, sometimes school, coming to school is a bit of a respite for some of our kids from tricky family dynamics, or whether they are living in, a group home or in a DCF placement. Coming to school and being in school full time can be a bit of a respite. They can get away from, some of the stressors at home or in their home environment. And then I think also something else that we're really seeing too is, I think Jacqueline, you hit on this too, is making sure that, communication is key within the family. We've had a lot of students who have expressed suicidality at either at school or at home. And sometimes, some of the parental response that we've seen is because that's such a scary thing. Sometimes we see some families, getting upset by that, or having a strong emotional reaction to hearing that their child has suicidal ideation, and really trying to work with families on, how to openly communicate about that, how to create a safety plan, how to ensure their child's safety while also dealing with something that, can be terrifying. So those are some of the bigger things that we're currently seeing at the school that I work at.
Thank you, Meredith. And if I could just add just something very brief, and that is if families have very young children, some of the parenting support classes that I've been doing are parents of preschoolers. And another problem in families is families are stressed as units. And so children who are 3, 4, and 5, who may not know how to ask questions about this or kind of why things are changing and what's happening, can still be fearful and anxious. And so parents having to deal with their own anxiety also need to communicate with their children in ways that show some degree of calm if possible, but at least the relationship that you've already forged with your children, needs to get the same, caring, and we are here and we're supporting you and we're going to keep you safe. And we are all in this together, as Kate said, the family. So let's do something fun tonight to make ourselves happy. And another question that just came in on the Q&A is, well, what about marital relationships? And families are units, and stress in those various relationships within the family may play a role in any kind of difficulties that couples are having. And so co-parents are also stressed and really need to be able to take care of themselves as well. And I think that we will talk about before we end tonight about self-care and how we can do that so that we can be there and supporting our children as well. So Adam, I'm gonna toss it back to you.
Sure. I think I see a couple, not want to update my computer now. I got a couple questions here that one of them I can maybe address briefly, but it's more of getting contact me. One of you've asked about current research references and where to find them. And so I can tell you, this may not be what this individual is exactly looking for, but it's a great reference for everyone that I found serendipitously doing a chat earlier this year. It's called handholdma.org. It's a great website for youth and families to access. It's just interface. It's really cool. It's neat. It's easy to use. Stuff from really simple to more advanced techniques and strategies, kind of psychoeducational components. And there could be some links there to references as well. That's handholdma.org. And I'm looking, as I was reading that question and as the others were speaking, I was going through my PDF hoarding files. I do have some articles on the pandemic and a couple email chains, for example, one from ABCT, Association for Behavioral Cognitive Therapies, where if someone wants to email me, after this chat, I can get back to you, and send you some PDF files. Maybe in the general chat, but I can put my email address. It's am.valungas@assumption.edu. So that's the best I can answer that one. I got another question here that I'll put towards Zach and Jacqueline, and you guys could answer this one specifically and maybe broaden it out. And I'll do my best to kind of maybe read this one word for word. So this individual is asking why it's so hard to find a therapist for a child, at least here in Massachusetts. It's a good question as well. And then she also asked about insurance. And then she also asked specifically about kids developing tics. Got a child about 10 years old who's got a throat clearing tic since last April. And once we moved into private school and she was back in school 5 days in October, a tic went away. I think it was related to stress. So maybe we'll start off with Jacqueline. If you can, why it's so hard to find a therapist for a child out here in Massachusetts. And then maybe kind of follow up. You can either address specifically about the tic, or you can kind of talk more broadly about how stress contributes to anxiety disorders.
Yeah. So especially during the pandemic, there's a major surge of, mental health needs right now. So I think especially with children who have never been through such an unsettling time, the anxiety and all the other accompanying disorders may be presenting even more so with children right now. And there's a number of clinicians who are working with children that have full caseloads where, a number of families are still seeking therapy for their children, trying to get in with somebody who already has full caseloads. So I think when it comes down to it, there's not enough counselors for the amount of need right now, which is resulting in wait lists. So I would be persistent in terms of if you're able to reach out to a counselor for assistance and they tell you that they're full, ask them for referrals. There are agencies out there, especially community agencies, that have a number of clinicians on staff who have a broad, sense of how to treat a various number of disorders, where you may be able to get in more quickly. They may take a more broad variety of insurances. So I would not give up, because there are definitely resources out there. And I believe that once a counselor has open communication with you, they can or should provide you alternate referrals. So in regards to that, I would just continue to put yourself on wait lists and continue to search around, but I would definitely look into your local community agency, because they might be able to get you in quicker than people who are more in private practice. In regards to the tics, so the tics may be something that once you get your child in with a therapist, they may be able to analyze a little bit more of where it could be coming from. It could very much be coming from stress. A lot of times anxiety disorders can manifest in psychosomatic symptoms where we might feel it in the body, and it could potentially result in something like a tic, or it could result in something like stomach aches. And there is that mind body connect. So if we're feeling a certain way mental health wise, it could affect us physically as well. So it's one of those things where I think, if you can get your child in with a counselor, talk about what might be the root of the tic, you may be able to help resolve it quicker. But again, I do want to emphasize that make sure that whoever that you do reach out to for therapists, ask them for referrals in the local area, because you definitely should be able to find somebody if you continue to be persistent about it.
I just want to piggyback, Jacqueline, real quick. So yes, I actually have seen several folks who have developed tics, and I think it's really easy for that to happen when we're all on Zoom, because there's less people, watching you. You can turn your camera off, and for lack of a better phrase, people can get weird when they're on their own, and then you can let this one little thing start to, get away from you, and before you know it, it's something that you kind of can't stop doing. I work with a teenager right now who's kind of got like this head cricking thing that he just started doing out of nowhere over the last year. And he hasn't been in school in person. And so one of the main first things that we'll do is I'll just tell him, keep track of it, self-monitor. There's so many apps you can download to just like counter apps to just make a little notation every time you do it. And there's this cool thing just called the Hawthorne effect. Anytime you're observing a behavior, it will change the behavior. So I told all you guys that I'm going to pay attention to how often you touch your hair, you touch your face. Well, you're all either going to do it more or less, because I'm keeping track of it. And the same holds true when you're doing it yourself. So just on the tics end, any habit, grinding your teeth, the little head crick thing, some people got like weird mouth things that they'll do, or little tongue clicks. Just keep track of it. And it's one of those things that it's pretty easy to extinguish that behavior just on your own. I would absolutely recommend getting in touch with a therapist if it's a little bit more of an intense behavior, or it's a little bit more persistent than that. And certainly to Jacqueline's point, she makes a fabulous, fabulous point. It's actually within our code of ethics that we're required to provide referrals. So if you call someone, you get a therapist on the line, realistically, we should have a couple people who we refer people to. At the moment, I'm referring folks to Adam because I know his caseload is wide open, and I have another colleague who's opening a private practice. So it's hard from the outside sometimes to locate who has availability. So sometimes if you can just be lucky enough to get one of those providers on the phone, you can get like the down low on who do they actually send people to when they're full. So I would certainly, to echo Jacqueline's point, be persistent, see if you can get those names.
Excellent responses, Zach and Jacqueline. And yeah, hey, I got some openings. Give me a call if you're in Massachusetts. I noticed, Meredith, I think you wanted to speak a little bit too about a program you're familiar with for referrals.
Yeah, so I just wanted to speak quickly about, there's a program called Project Interface, and a lot of school districts subscribe to this program. So if your child is within a school district that subscribes to this program, you can contact the program. It's actually through my current college, so through William James College, and it's a full referral service. So you call them, you tell them what insurance you have, your child's presenting problems, whether you want, individual or group or family therapy, and they'll set everything up for you. So they'll find the referrals for you, they'll make the initial appointments. So if your child's school district is part of that program, then you can utilize that. So I urge you to, ask your kids' schools if they subscribe to it. Just a quick side note.
Great, that's great. All right, another good resource. We have a couple of questions. Kate, there's a couple of questions that have come in that you might be able to speak to. One is about how would you suggest, or do you have any suggestions for combating academic fatigue, which a little bit just came up very briefly earlier. And then secondly, do you think remote learning increases or decreases social anxiety? So those are two different ones, but if you want, you take them one at a time.
Fantastic questions. Academic fatigue in general right now, I think what's most important, or that we can kind of lean on, is building a structured schedule, something that the students can kind of rely on when we're overwhelmed, when we're burdened by academics or outside activities or sports, or then if we're remote and at home, demands at home, just keeping things structured and organized as much as possible, so that when things do become overwhelmed or we're exhausted, we can lean back on that. Reach out, like I was saying before, reach out to your village, reach out to your people, the teachers remotely or in person. Take breaks, take breaks, get up, move around if they're working remotely, to take advantage of that PE class that's structured into your schedule, participate in it, reward yourself, reward this good behavior of us, sitting at home, working diligently, build in ways. I always say to students sometimes, what is a way that you're going to increase your dopamine today? What are you going to do? How are you going to reward yourself for what you just did? And again, if you're working remotely, you have counselors that are assigned to your students that you can work with to help in situations like this. If the students are in person and attending school, it's exhausting. If they're going from working remotely to in person, so now they not just to get to school, or they turning on their computer, but we're getting up, we're brushing our teeth, hopefully we're getting ready for school, clothes on, breakfast, taking a bus, getting to school, and now they're in front of their teacher. So it's exhausting just now getting to school, and then we're wearing a mask for most of the day. There are mask breaks, we're taking a mask off at lunch. So, and then what type of mask can you wear in person? So and naturally in school, there are breaks to kind of build in some time to just pause and take it all in for a moment. What we're asking our young people and our teenagers and children to do is demanding. And on top of that, let's learn, let's learn, let's have good behavior. So, we just, sometimes it's just okay to be okay, and just to be okay with how things are right now, and just to try our best and to celebrate the wins, whatever they are, whatever you feel like that win is. But and then to answer your other question, this is a great one. They kind of feed off of one another. I think certainly there will be remote programs moving forward, maybe perhaps more remote programs, academic remote programs that we have. So families might be leaning towards to be less likely to send their children back to in-person learning if they've had a positive experience. On the contrary, some students are really missing the social nuances of the school day and all of that there is. Social anxiety, I think that remote learning has, we've kind of fostered some of it. We're isolated, we're home, we're comfortable in that. And now, getting back into the world is certainly an adjustment, as our panelists were speaking to earlier. So I'm not sure if one creates one or the other. However, it's an adjustment on either side.
If I can just jump in to add on that, Kate, I think you made a great point. I think regardless of whether obviously it was not intentional, but an important thing to acknowledge is that remote learning and telehealth, everything has inadvertently reinforced social anxiety. People who love avoiding in-person interactions had a silver platter for this last year where they could just withdraw from all usual activities. And remembering that, back in 7th, 8th grade, when we had to give a speech in front of the class or give a presentation when we get nervous, facing those situations and experiencing that you can do things You can push through that discomfort when you're anxious, and you can still meet the demands of life. Those are important learning experiences that a whole generation of kids is missing out on right now. They're learning that you can just avoid, and you actually don't have to do the thing that you're anxious about. You can always turn your camera off and mute if you say you're uncomfortable. And I really do think that has hardcore facilitated a lot of just accidental increases in social anxiety, because in the socially anxious person's mind, I'm just trying to feel better. I feel better when I turn the camera off. I feel better when I turn my mic off. And of course they do. But then they never learn that they can kind of push through that and the discomfort will subside, which I think kind of the same folks fall into that category of, I don't want to go back in person. I'm scared. What's it going to be like? I like being on my computer all day. So I just wanted to build on that, Kate, because I think, I think inadvertently we have reinforced social anxiety.
Those are great thoughts, Kate and Zach, and it's a good segue topic to one of the other questions we have here as well. And I'm keeping in mind the time as well. Looks like we got a little under 8 minutes left. Jacqueline, we got a question here about handling germophobia, but maybe but it's a double-barreled question. Maybe the second one might be a little bit more helpful. And anyone else can jump in on this as well after, is how do you approach promote adaptive functioning when teaching with my undergrads, even them, and my graduate students especially, about the importance of behavioral exposure, which is to Zach's and Kate's point about you're avoiding the very thing that you want to confront. So how do you, Jacqueline and others, handle exposure when you're restricted with telehealth? What can be done?
So exposure, especially not only with telehealth, but with COVID-19 in general, has been very difficult, because typically if we have a concern about contracting an illness and we're repetitively washing our hands or not touching doorknobs, usually we would do something in relation to exposure where it would say, okay, maybe we'll wash our hands a few times less per day, get through the uncomfortability of the anxiety to realize that over time, we're not going to contract an illness. But when you add COVID-19 into that, in addition to telehealth, where, with telehealth, we're not able to engage in the exposure therapy present with the client at the time, this creates an issue. So it really comes down to finding the healthy balance of, if exposure therapy is implemented during a time where there is some sense of this risk of contracting COVID-19, we need to make sure that we're maintaining the proper hygiene practices that are recommended by the CDC, and that we are being balanced in that way in doing it. So we have to be careful and work collaboratively as therapists with clients to ensure that what we're exposing them to is truly going to be safe. So that's something that's come up often with clients who experience, concerns with germs or like an OCD type of concern. So when it comes to telehealth, we're also limited, because it would be something where, they would either engage in exposure therapy on the screen, or they would engage in exposure therapy in between sessions where we're not there to guide them through, the feelings of anxiety while they're doing it. So I really think it comes down to collaborating with the client and the therapist to determine what is a good game plan, what is the client comfortable with engaging in, and ensuring that the therapist is recommending something that's going to keep them safe while they're sort of buckling down during the time of COVID, and maybe even putting some of the lower risk concerns on hold until COVID has passed and working on more of the higher risk concerns. So I think ultimately it comes down to collaborating and just taking a step back and ensuring that what you're doing truly is, from an objective standpoint, a safe way to proceed.
And just building on that a tiny bit too, the CDC guidelines are tremendously helpful for that. I typically refer my folks with OCD and kind of concerns about contamination to the CDC website, which has been great about updating the guidelines as they've shifted during all of this madness. So, when the CDC kind of comes out, they say, hey, you don't need to wipe down your groceries anymore. Well, I love to, share that with my folks and say, hey, you don't need to be wiping down your groceries anymore. I know it makes you feel more comfortable, but it also might be kind of inadvertently reinforcing that anxiety that you feel that I must clean everything because I'm going to get COVID if I, don't wipe down my can of beans. So within the CDC guidelines, as those have shifted, I've worked with some of my clients just to say, oh, hey, you still wiping down your groceries? You feel comfortable? Like maybe you could get away from that yet? And, slowly we have been kind of inching toward exposure within the home. And like Jacqueline said, a lot of that other stuff that you just can't touch because we're all trapped inside, you kind of just have to wait until the pandemic is over.
Great, thanks, Zach. Yeah, okay. We got a couple minutes. Mira, do you have any like a quick question for the panelists, or what are your thoughts? Got about 4 minutes left.
I was just, I wanted to add to your suggestion about some of the resources. Someone had asked about articles or resources or places they could look. And one of the things that we always in parenting education classes, they go by so quickly, like this is going by so quickly. And people say, well, where can I look to get more information? And I just wanted to add a couple that I thought were very helpful and that also have sources for people out there who might have very young children or children who may not need a therapist at this point, but parents want to be more aware and more supportive of their children's social and emotional well-being, trying to keep as much as possible structure and routines in the home, and really focusing on, sort of the nurturing and responsive relationships that all children need, not just young children. But two sources that I found were particularly, I thought had great resources. One was the CDC, which Zach just mentioned, but the CDC also has a section of their website for dealing with parents wanting help, helping their children deal with COVID-19. And it has lots of sources it can send you to get more information. The other source is the National Association of School Psychologists. So Meredith probably knows of this one. They have, it's not just for school psychologists, they have a great website that, again, National Association of School Psychologists, and they have a great section on helping children cope with changes resulting from COVID-19. And lots of kind of walking parents through how to be a role model, how to be aware of the way you talk to your children, how to focus on how to teach coping strategies, that deep breathing we talked about, and other kinds of strategies, focusing on the positive in the family. So again, that's a great resource as well, if people want to look for some. And certainly we can, I'm mckenna@anselm.edu, and if anybody wanted kind of a list of online resources, I'd be happy to send you some more.
Thanks, Mira. It looks like we're essentially out of time. I saw one quick question for you. Mira, it says, what town are your parenting classes in?
Derry.
Derry, in the beautiful state of New Hampshire.
We have a great family support center here, the upper room.
Great. Thank you. So it does look like we're at a time here. I just wanted to say that, like anything, I know it's a bit cliche, but there is so much more we could say, right? This went by really, really fast once the questions came in. Great questions, engaging topic. And I genuinely mean this. Kate, Meredith, Jacqueline, Zach, I mean, you guys were really the ones that, really took care of these questions and had really helpful insight. Again, another cliche is the ones that are, in the trenches, on the ground, so to speak. That's where we get a lot of that helpful advice. So I'm grateful that all of you were able to join Maria and I to do this panel discussion. And I have a feeling our audience really enjoyed it as well. So I know if Maria, you want any final comments, or anyone else before we sign off?
Yes, I just want to say thank you also. It's been great to spend this hour with all of you.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's been fantastic.
Yes, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you as well. I really enjoyed it.
That's great. Take care, everyone, and have a good night.
Good night.